Good evening and welcome to tonight's episode of What the Friday. I'm glad you've joined me. Tonight I'm bringing you the story of the disappearance and presumed murder of Judge Curtis Chillingworth and his wife Marjorie. This happened way back in 1955, and I've got to say it's a pretty interesting story, so stick around.
Welcome to What the Friday, the After Dark series presented by Mystery, Murder, and Magic. Listener discretion is advised.
Now, before we get tonight's episode started, I just want to give a big shout out to y'all, the listeners. I rarely look at the stats for the show because it's really more of a hobby than a career for me. But just before I started recording, I took a glance. My annoying southern voice is being heard in so many countries, and y'all, that just thrills me. Y'all just don't even know. The United States is where I get the most listens, but close behind the U.S. is the United Kingdom, and then there's Australia, Kuwait, Canada, and Germany. So how cool is that? I want to thank y'all for that. Every single one of y'all keep me going. It's just so awesome that people from all over tune in to listen to me tell stories of true crimes and other creepy subjects. Now, let's get tonight's episode started. Before we talk about what happened to Curtis and his wife Marjorie, they're the Chillingworths, let's talk about who they were. And Curtis, he was born in an affluent West Palm Beach, Florida family in October of 1896. In 1917, he graduated from the University of Florida, and later that same year, he was admitted to the Florida bar. He enlisted in the Navy soon after he graduated, and while he was in the Navy, he attended the U.S. Naval Academy. Well, he went on to serve through World War I, and when he came back from that, he started practicing law with his father. Well, shortly after he started practicing law with his father, when he was just 24, he began his career as a judge. First, he was a county judge, and then 2 years later, he was elected to serve as a circuit court judge. And y'all, that's a pretty big accomplishment for somebody so young. And in fact, he was the youngest person in Florida's history to hold that position, and he'd hold it until his death. Well, throughout all of that, Curtis had remained in the U.S. Naval Reserves, and he was called back to active duty during World War II. And also during that time, he married Marjorie McKinney, and over the years, the two of them had 3 daughters. So now we're going to fast forward a bit to the year 1955, and it's June the 14th. Curtis and Marjorie attended a dinner party, and they left from it around 10 p.m. that night. They drove home to their beach cottage, and they went to bed. Well, the next morning, they were expecting a contractor to come by and, do estimates and whatnot for building a playground for their grandchildren. Now, other than his time in the Navy and being a judge, those were the main things that he was known for. But he was also known for being punctual. And he was known to literally stand outside of his courtroom staring at his watch. So when he didn't meet the contractors that morning, I'm sure somebody figured something just wasn't right. But they decided to go take a swim in the ocean, as the contractors did, to pass the time. Well, as they went around the house, they started figuring out something wasn't right. Because when they got behind the house, they found what they believed was blood. Then they started looking around more, and they noticed that a floodlight on the back of the house was shattered. Across town at a courthouse, Judge Chillingworth had failed to show up for a 10 a.m. hearing. So yeah, something definitely wasn't right. Well, by lunchtime that day, the Chillingworth property was swarming with police officers, but honestly, there just wasn't a whole lot to go on. And all they found was the glass from the busted floodlight, blood on the porch steps, signs of a struggle in the sand, and there was an empty spool of tape. And robbery, though, it kind of sounded like a robbery, but then it was quickly ruled out as a motive because there was still cash in Marjorie's purse. And the keys to the Chillingworths vehicle were still in the ignition. And that was it. There was no leads, no suspects, nothing. And the case went cold. And there was suspicions as far as late suspects. I mean, Curtis, he was a judge, so he sent many criminals to the big house. And, maybe one of them wanted some retaliation. But you can't arrest someone just for a suspicion. And this was the days before fancy forensic equipment and stuff like that. So it wasn't like they could just go get some DNA from anything that was found and track down the killer. Well, 2 years after their disappearance, the Chillingworths were declared legally dead. But there's another judge that we need to talk about in this case. And this judge was the complete opposite of Curtis. Where Curtis was upstanding and honest, this judge was shady to say the least. And this judge's name was Joseph Peel. Now, it seems that in 1953, Peel had represented both a husband and wife in a divorce, and this was something that shouldn't be done. Judge Chillingworth had lectured him on it, and he told him it was highly unethical. He gave him a stern warning, and when he gave him that warning, he assured Peel it would be his only warning. Well, most of us would take that warning to heart, and they would straighten up and fly right, but not Judge Peel. And Peel, he was a bit of a playboy, and he loved the finer things in life. Back then, a judge's salary was only $3,000 a year, but it seems that Peel was able to afford the best of everything, and nobody questioned it. So how was it that he was able to afford the luxuries that he enjoyed? Well, Peel liked to play both sides of the law, and with the help of two of his buddies, he ran a protection ring. When police needed a warrant, it was Peel who had to sign them. But after signing that, he would contact those buddies of his to spread the word that a raid was about to take place. Criminals were paying Peel big money for this information, and it wasn't long before what he would make, or most judges would make in a year. He was making that in a week. And he wasn't too smart about it either, and didn't cover up his tracks very well, and eventually it all caught up with him, and because of that, he was disbarred. But he continued to act as an attorney even after he was disbarred, and he handled another divorce case unethically. And this time, he had told a woman that she was indeed divorced. Well, the woman remarried, and sometime later, that couple went to adopt a child. Well, that's when she found out that she wasn't divorced, and she was a bigamist. And for this, he was set up to go before Judge Chillingworth. That's who he was supposed to meet with. Judge Chillingworth was supposed to meet with Judge Peel that morning at 10 o'clock, and he never showed up. Well, on that night in June 1955, Peel got two of his friends, a man named Floyd Holtzfeld and Bobby Lincoln, to do him a favor. The two took a boat and pulled up on the beach right behind the Chillingworth home. Lincoln hid in the shrubbery beside the home, while Holtzfeld knocked on the door. Still in his pajamas, Judge Chillingworth answered the door, and Holtzfeld pulled a gun on him. From there, he forced Curtis and Marjorie into a boat. And after they was drifting off for about an hour, the Chillingworths were thrown overboard with lead weights on their ankles. Now, Peel probably would have gotten away with it too, but like I already mentioned, he wasn't too bright. He bragged about the whole thing to one of his friends who had also known the Chillingworths. Well, this was around 1960, so this friend, his name was James Yenzer, and one of his friends, who was an ex-West Beach police officer, they lured Holtzfeld to a nearby hotel, and they got him drunk. And while he was drunk, he started talking about those murders. And what Holtzfeld didn't know was that in the hotel room next door was a member of Florida's Sheriff's Bureau, and he was recording the entire conversation. Well, in that hotel room, he said that he and Lincoln had driven a boat to just behind the Chillingworth home. And once they were on land, Lincoln hid in the bushes while Hopesville knocked on the door. Well, when Judge Chillingworth answered the door, Hopesville asked if he was Judge Chillingworth. And he answered that he was. And at that point, Lincoln ran from the bushes and smashed the floodlight with his gun. Hopesville pulled a gun and asked if anyone else was in his house, and that's when Judge Chillingworth called for Marjorie. The couple's hands were taped, and they were led to the boat. But as they were walking out to the beach, Marjorie starts screaming, so Hopesville strikes her with his gun, and this is where that trail of blood came from. Well, when they're finally on the boat, Judge Chillingworth offered them $200,000. But the thugs wouldn't take it, and they started strapping lead weights onto the Chillingworths. Well, once they were pretty far offshore, Hopesville says, "Ladies first," and he pushed Marjorie overboard. Then it was Judge Chillingworth's turn, but he wasn't sinking as easily as Marjorie had. They ended up having to tie a 25-pound anchor around his neck and then beat him with a shotgun before he would sink. Well, on October the 1st of that year, Hopesville was arrested, and the following December, he pleaded guilty to both of the murders. He was sentenced to death, but 6 years later, his sentence was commuted to life, and he actually died in prison 30 years later. In March of 1961, Peel was found guilty of accessory to murder, and he received 2 life sentences. But in 1982, he was paroled because he was in really bad health due to cancer. The entire time that he had been in prison, though, he claimed he didn't have a thing to do with the murders of the Chillingworths. But get this. When he was on his deathbed, which was right after he was paroled, he admitted to everything. And he even said that Judge Chillingworth was basically a roadblock in his quest to go from state attorney to attorney general to governor. So, hey, I guess, let's just get rid of those roadblocks in your way instead of doing it the honest way. Well, Bobby Lincoln, he was already in prison serving time for another crime he'd committed when all of it hit the fan. And he did cooperate with the investigation and was granted immunity from prosecution for those murders. Here's another get this moment, y'all. This wasn't even a murder for hire. They did it for free. Not that that makes it any better or any worse, but, they didn't even have to be paid off to do it. Now, they admitted in court that Peel hadn't paid them a penny to carry out the murders. Well, Lincoln finished his federal sentence in 1962, and then he passed away in 2004. And to this day, needless to say, I guess, Chillingworth's bodies have never been found, and, I seriously doubt they ever will, because, that's been so many years ago. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that at the time this took place, West Palm Beach was nothing like how the city is now. Now it's kind of like a luxury resort type thing. But back then it was just a beach town, like a little beach town. And back then the population was only 150,000, where now it's well over 1 million. So when this happened, it was shocking, and it's even been called the crime of the century. So, I had never heard about that happening, but, it was a pretty interesting story. Most of the stuff that I bring to y'all, I come by accident, and, it's like one of those, you get down this rabbit hole and you start finding all of this stuff. So, I don't know. But, I'm going to move on because I want to talk about the Harmony Montgomery case for a minute, and I was hoping to have more information by now because, last month I told y'all that the investigation into her disappearance is now being called a homicide. Like I said, I was hoping to have so much more on this by now, but there's just nothing being released yet, other than the fact that forensic evidence says that Harmony was more than likely killed in early December of 2019. And as you may recall, this was like 2 years before that poor baby was even reported missing. No remains have still been found, but like I said, authorities are now calling this a homicide investigation. Now, Harmony's sperm donor, Adam, he's also facing charges related to weapons and theft. Apparently, in the months before Harmony was murdered, Adam stole firearms And the charges that he's facing for that are felony level charges. And the trial for those charges is expected to be sometime in November, but they haven't set an exact date as of right now. And if you missed it last week, or earlier this week, sorry, I gave y'all an update on a missing persons case that I first talked about back in February 2021, but I'm going to go over it again because it was just kind of a spur of the moment update that I did while I was sitting in the car pickup line. But on that episode, I mentioned that, and this is the episode from 2021, I mentioned that several women from an area in the northwest corner of South Carolina are missing, and one of those that's missing is Faith Roach. And she's actually been missing since 2019. And when she went missing, her family told authorities that she met up with somebody in a burgundy van. And after that, she was never seen or heard from again. And her phone did ping one last time from somewhere on Tunnel Road in Walhalla. And later on, some jewelry belonging to Faith was found scattered along that same road. Well, after that, there wasn't anything new until Wednesday of last week, when the Oconee County Sheriff Mike Crenshaw announced that 2 arrests had been made in connection with that case. Cheyenne J. Turner, she was arrested on charges of obstruction of justice and misprision of a felony. And now, like I said, I'd never heard of misprision of a felony, but I had to do a little digging to figure out what that was. And this is what I found, is that it's defined as a criminal neglect either to prevent a felony from being committed or to bring the offender to justice after its commission, but without such previous concert with or subsequent assistance of as will make the concealer an accessory before or after the fact. So, y'all, I'm still not 100% sure what that is. Maybe y'all understood that a little bit better. I think I will educate myself a little bit more on that later on today. So, I don't know, maybe I'm not reading that right, but kind of sounds like an accessory before or after the fact type of charge. But the warrant for her arrest said that between May the 3rd and May 24th, she failed to produce evidence of a known felony. No such evidence exists. Now, it hasn't been revealed what that evidence is, though. And also arrested in connection to this case was Marcus Walters. And his arrest warrant says that, quote, he is charged with perjury, but the main thing is the perjury comes from corruptly swearing falsely and materially that he was present during the commission of a crime, and that he had advanced knowledge of a conspiracy to commit said crime, and that's the end of that quote. And that perjury just happened back on the 22nd of August of this year. Now, also related to the case of Faith Roach, there's a man that's been sitting in prison. His name's Kevin Mahler. And right now he's serving time on a 5-year prison sentence for drug offenses. But he's also accused of the 2019 murder of Kevin Craig. And it's believed that Mahler confined Craig to a room, and he either injected him with an unknown substance or supplied the unknown substance that was injected that caused Craig's death. Now, Mahler has been charged with murder and kidnapping and that. So, what investigators are saying is that the reason he killed Craig was that Craig knew some type of information in Faith's disappearance. But y'all, to me, nothing says, you're guilty like killing off people who may rat you out. But anyway, if you know anything about Faith's disappearance or, anything to do with that, you're asked to call Crime Stoppers, and that number is 1-888-CRIME-SC. Now, Faith's family, they haven't seen her for over 3 years now, and I can't even imagine what that must be like for them. And she does have a little boy that is missing his mommy. It's just amazing to me that nothing has as came up, there's so much to this. It's just not making a whole lot of sense, but it looks like they're closing in on closing this case. But like I said, if you do know anything, give that number a call. It's 1-888-PRIME-SC. Well, that's all I have for tonight's episode. Thank you for listening, and be sure to come back on Monday for an all-new Mystery, Murder, and Mayhem. Good night.